That's better. Okay, so what I've spent most of my career teaching is there are two main classes that I teach. One is consumer behavior, and the other one is marketing research. And what I cover, the class that I've taught at the graduate level, there's a class on influence and persuasion in the workplace. And so a lot of my background is on influence, persuasion. What is the language we use to persuade people in the context of advertising, in the context of business, etc. And this whole idea for this presentation started with a conversation I had with Tom at the Harvest Festival, where I just went up to your booth and was talking to him. And I was telling him that I used to be a fairly regular part of this group many, many years ago. I've been in Duluth for, this is what, 92, end of 92, I moved to Duluth. So it's been 33 years now. That sound right? Something years. Anyway, so I used to, and I said, I love the group. And he said, why aren't you coming? And I gave him some, I told him some things that I'm not sure he wanted to hear, but he was very gracious about it. And he asked me to come and talk to this group about having, I was telling him about conversations I have with believers in my class. Like, I'm not shy about telling students in my class that I'm an atheist. I'm a very kind of open and proud atheist, and which is maybe something that a lot of people are not comfortable telling their students, but I am. And I explained to him how I have these conversations because I have students who are very, very firm and strong believers. And I often invite them to my office and we have some great conversations. So he thought that might be an interesting topic for me to talk about. What does the research say about how you can have good conversations with people who think very differently from you? So before I even get started, let me ask you this. Have any of you ever had a difficult conversation with a believer? If not, then I'm not sure I haven't valued you as you. You have? Can you tell me a little bit about it? What was it?
So I have a very good friend who's a PhD trained theologian and Lutheran pastor.
Oh, great.
And absolutely on the right or left side of, all the good stuff in the world. She's a great person, very, very intelligent, probably one of the most intelligent people I know. And when he found out we were playing coming to Freethinkers regularly, she talked to me about how she had done a paper as part of her PhD about Freethinkers and the history of it, and focused on the negative part of Freethinkers after, free world war movement, how it was the basis for some of Hitler's ideology, and it was really difficult because we are, I would say, aligned in almost every way.
But what was difficult about it? What made it uncomfortable?
It took me a while to figure out that what happened was she was taking something very personally, the whole young ministry of Freethinkers
Right.
website about, not losing leprechauns and so forth and so that kind of thing. And not wanting to indoctrinate children with falsehoods. So that was very offensive to her personally. And
Great. Okay. That's a fabulous example because I'm going to kind of build on that as we go through the presentation. Who else? Some other description of a tough conversation that you had? Yeah, that was not pleasant.
Well, one of the conversations is with myself because I'm a former believer. So deconstructed, right? So I had many of these conversations of disagreeing with myself. And the others are when I come to realize, having been a former believer, and now I wouldn't call myself an atheist, I call myself a free thinker, that I'm capable of thinking about lots of things and respecting various opinions. But I realize that if I'm talking to somebody that disagrees with me on this topic, we're not having the same conversation.
Right.
Not at all. And so
that's what makes
it light bulb. It's like, this is not the same.
Great. Anyone else? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so So have you ever done a presentation here to this group about the NRA or about your? Okay, good. I'm going to pick up on actually a lot of what you've said. And for you, this is going to be great because you're going to learn to have better conversations with yourself. How cool is that? You're going to be less frustrated with yourself at the end of this presentation than when So the thing is, it doesn't matter if it's just about religion or about political ideology or conservative. The point is that sometimes conversations get very, very difficult. This brings me to sort of an inconvenient truth that while as free thinkers or humanists or atheists, whatever we want to call ourselves, as we think about ourselves and our views, atheists or we tend to we think of religious people as very dogmatic, but we tend to be pretty dogmatic in our own beliefs. We actually have quite a lot of moral certainty in our beliefs about our openness, our willingness to accept ideas. We don't call it dogmatism. We just call it being right. Obviously, we're right. Why we have this whole, I guess what I wanted to talk about here today is that generally we do have evidence that certain religious conversations do go bad, right? And as atheists, we often take on a mode, kind of preacher mode, where we see our role as having to tell people why they're idiots, right? And that's, I mean, maybe we don't use that language. We don't see ourselves as being that harsh, but, we approach the conversation as, what is wrong with you people? Are you clueless? Are you blind? Do you not see what's going on? I mean, that's the kind of approach. And I call that preacher mode. And I'll talk about these different modes of approaching conversations very, very soon. And what I'm here to tell you about is that in general, curiosity works much better than certainty. And we'll talk about how do we do that? How do we get into this curious mode in terms of having effective conversations? Talking about certainty. How do we even know that we're right about anything? What leads us to any kind of certainty? When you encounter new information, when you encounter something that you didn't know before, what happens? How do you react to it? So let me present some facts. These are just some interesting facts. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I'm on the, give me 1 second here. Okay, so how do we even know we're right? Well, there's actually a lot of research that has looked at people's level of confidence and certainty. It turns out that as human beings, we tend to be very confident in our beliefs. Why? Because it's really the right, I mean, it helps us, right, to know that we are right. If you go around thinking you're an idiot, you're not going to get very far, right? So you have to believe it. It's helpful to you to believe that you're right. We tend to be quite confident in our beliefs. And the reason that's a problem is we are very bad at estimating our own knowledge. Lots of research has shown that we tend to be pretty poor at estimating our knowledge. In fact, not only that, they've shown that smarter people tend to believe that they are less prone to bias than others, even though they are just as prone to bias. I mean, a lot of these biases are absolutely human psychological biases that we can't escape. But the smarter people get, the less likely they think they are subject to bias. You think that people who are good at math, right, the quantitatively strong people, are better at analyzing and interpreting data, right? Well, they did that in a study. they tested to see whether math whizzes, and I'm using that term loosely, or quantitatively strong people, math whizzes are better at analyzing and interpreting data than people who are not math whizzes. What do you think they found? Actually, the good news is they found math whizzes are better. They found that people who are good at math are better at analyzing and interpreting data than people who are not good at it. But here's the interesting twist. When these math whizzes were given data that they thought were coming from people who had an opposing belief, they did not do well. They were worse than their peers at analyzing that data. That is, if you are a liberal math whiz and you were told that this data is showing that gun bans don't work or something like that, something that was opposed to their beliefs, they were no better than their peers at analyzing that data, at interpreting the data. So it turns out that even our ability to interpret data depends on whether we think the data is something that's consistent with our beliefs or inconsistent with our beliefs. Our convictions are often led by superficial knowledge, and there's this interesting study where they asked people how confident they are that they know how everyday household objects work. Do you know how a zipper works? Do you know how a sewing machine works? How well do you understand how these cell phone works? And most people rated their understanding of how it works as very high. Then they asked them, okay, write down, explain how a zipper works. Explain how a sewing machine works. And they found most people could not explain it. Again, there's a bit of good news here, is that after they were asked to explain, tell me how it works, and found that they couldn't do it, their level of confidence in their understanding went down. And I'm going to come back to this a little later when we talk about how to have more effective conversations. So now let me ask you, what happens? So we're talking about things that you don't know, that you think you know. How do we as human beings generally react to new information, things that we didn't know before? And this is the slide I was waiting for. Here are some facts. These are all true facts. A cloud weighs around 1 million tons. Ants, they breathe, but they don't have lungs. Bananas are radioactive. If you're a banana fan like me, just know that the radioactivity is very, very tiny. In fact, the amount of radioactivity in your body is higher than, but because they're rich in potassium, they do have, there's some, I don't know the science, but there's some potassium 40 or something, which is radioactive component. But tell me, when you encounter facts like this, how do you react? What is the thought that goes through your head?
Yeah, happy to learn.
Yeah. Okay. What else? They have something called spiracles, which are little openings on their body that they're no lungs. It actually goes, the oxygen that they take in is processed by the cells directly through these little openings that they can open and shut. Okay, so you want to know more, right? Say, okay, so what do they have? So, oh my gosh, I learned something. So if they don't have lungs, what do they have? What else? Yeah. Yeah, and exactly. This is brilliant because typically this is how most of us react to information like this, right? How big of a cloud is it? And it turns out, by the way, that a typical cloud is about 1 cubic kilometer. That is great. So you tend to want to know more. It turns out that when we encounter information like this, things that we don't know, we become very curious. We want to find out a little. But then, here's another interesting fact. They did a study that there are limits to our curiosity. We seem to be generally curious when we encounter information we don't know, except under certain circumstances. And when you encounter information on politically charged issues, whether that's religion or politics or whatever it is, the curiosity disappears completely. Here's what this study showed. What they did was just fascinating, simple little study. They asked people to read passages written by folks. They said, here on politically charged issue, on gun bans, on abortion, on religion, whatever it is. They asked people, would you be willing to read a passage written by someone who with the same views as you for a chance to win $7? Right? Then they asked other people, would you be willing to read a passage from somebody with an opposing view for $10? Actually, it was the same people. They gave them the choice. They said, you can read a passage written by a like-minded individual on a politically charged issue for a chance to win $7, but we'll also give you the option. You can read a paragraph or read an article written by somebody with an opposing view for a chance to win $10. It turns out that 2/3 of the people chose to only take the $7 option. I would rather read an article written by a like-minded person for $7 rather than chance to win more money, but having to go through the hellish experience of reading an opinion that is coming from somebody who is very different from me. So where does this curiosity go? It turns out that we are very curious individuals, except when we feel it threatens our identity. The heart of this, the reason why we tend not to want to read articles written by people with opposing views or hear from people with opposing views is because it makes us feel bad about ourselves. In my consumer behavior class, I literally start the semester by telling them there are two things that all human beings want. If you understand this, you've understood, you can master communications, you can master advertising, you can master business strategy. If you understand the two things that every human being wants, at their very core, people want to feel good about themselves. People want to look good to others. Yeah. Oh, okay. I will maintain my high stage voice. Okay, thank you. So what I said was, at the very base, people want to feel good about themselves. People want to look good to others. And when you encounter information that goes against your core things that you have linked to your identity, you see it as a threat and you react strongly against it. You don't want to hear it. You want to react against it. And the way we do that is by taking on a role in the conversation. And what role is that? There's a book, which, by the way, I recommend very strongly. There's a book by a guy called Adam Grant called Think Again. That's one of my highly recommended books. And in there, he says that in conversations, we tend to take on one of four roles. What are these four roles? He says the preacher, the prosecutor, the politician, and the scientist. And the scientist is what he recommends for effective conversations. He says very often we go into conversations, the preacher mode is we have our beliefs. And the goal of the conversation is for me to tell you, let me tell you why I have these beliefs. Let me tell you why free thinking is the right way, why it is better for society if everybody was a free thinker. That's the preacher mode, right? We have our beliefs, and what we want to do is spread the word, get more people to think like us. The prosecutor mode is where you have a lot of knowledge and your goal is to destroy the opponent. Oh, really? You believe there's a man in the sky who's sitting there caring whether you score a touchdown or not, right? The goal is you have the knowledge, you point out, you're looking for flaws and fallacies in their thinking. If they happen to make a weak argument, you just pounce on them and say, the goal is to win the argument. That's the prosecutor mode. And most atheists tend to switch between prosecutor and preacher mode in conversations. Politician mode is where you're trying to be agreeable. You want to get along with everybody. You don't want to say things that are too controversial. You speak a lot but say very little. And when somebody says, I believe in God, you say, well, the world is a mysterious place. You atheists generally don't take on the politician role unless you're talking to your religious grandmother. Then you take on the politician role. You say, no, I understand why you have those beliefs, those kinds of things. And the other place where atheists are very comfortable taking on the politician role is when they're in a group with like-minded people, right? Then you know that everybody else has these same common beliefs, and you try to outdo yourself in your atheism. I have read Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris. I have read more of these atheist books. Did you watch that last TED Talk by some, where you're trying to show people, the goal is to show people how knowledgeable you are in this world that you're in. So this is less common. It's usually more prosecutor, preacher role. With the scientist role, what Adam Grant says is the goal of the conversation is to learn. You are not trying to preach. You don't care whether the person converts to free thinking or not. You don't care to win any argument with them. You're just trying to learn. Let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So as I said, water. There, just a little bottle. Oh, thank you. Oh, look at this. Everybody's rushing to get me. So, thank you. So, in the preacher mode, as I said, I have the truth. You have moral certainty. You know that your beliefs are the right thing, and you wish that everybody else would think the way you do. And so you feel that it is your responsibility to educate the world. You go into conversations trying to explain to them why their thinking is wrong. You tend to be focused on your beliefs and why those beliefs are right. Ironically, atheists hate preachers unless they're the ones doing it, right? then it's like, don't you see? Okay? So that's the preacher mode. In prosecutor mode, as I said, the focus is not on you. The focus is on the opponent. How do I show you what an idiot you are? You are looking for arguments. You just are waiting for them. There are few arguments that you have got well prepared. You know that at some point they're going to say something like, if you don't believe in God, where does your morality come from? And you've got a prepared argument. You say, oh, really? You need a fear of punishment from God in order to be to know that you shouldn't kill a fellow human being? That doesn't sound like you're very moral. You're the one with the problem. That's the prosecutor mode. You have prepared arguments, and you're just almost waiting for them to present that argument so you can just destroy them. Right? How do you know you have moved into prosecutor mode? By the way, if any of you have ever responded to a Facebook comment with a comment that was more than 500 words, you have been in prosecutor mode. So that's the prosecutor mode. The politician mode, as I said, this is somewhat less common. It is, do you believe in God? And you say something like, well, the world is full of mysteries that we don't know. We have to be open-minded, those kinds of things. You avoid saying too much that would rock the boat. But what he says is the way we should approach conversations is in scientist mode. And scientist mode, you have only one goal. The goal of the conversation is to learn why people have the beliefs that they do. The whole purpose of the conversation is not to convert them, not to find flaws in their argument, but the cool thing about being in scientist mode is the more extreme the other person's views are. If you are a progressive liberal and somebody is a hardcore MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter, you go into that conversation not wanting to slap them in the face, but wanting to know, wow, tell me more. Spiracles, if they don't have lungs, how do they breathe? Wow, that's interesting. You go into that conversation wanting to understand where their beliefs come, with the possibility that you may learn something. You don't have to win the argument. You just have to come out of that conversation with some information that you didn't have going in. And if you approach a conversation that way, it turns out that what you do is you avoid the biggest conversation killer, which is identity threat. People feel safe if they don't think that they're being attacked. And ironically, as we'll get into maybe a little bit later, is that it actually turns out it's easier to change people's minds if they don't have that defensiveness up. So the scientist mode of conversation is the only way to reduce people's defensiveness. It creates the psychological safety. People are willing to have these conversations, and therefore you can actually have a productive conversation where you come out of it not having changed a person's mind, but you come out of it feeling that you have learned something. And this requires one huge mental change. This sounds simple, but it's very, very hard to do because it requires you to have one mindset change. And that is to enjoy being wrong. And that is, it doesn't feel good for most people to feel wrong. Daniel Kahneman, who is one of our, he's a Nobel Prize winning behavioral scientist, and he had this statement. He said that being wrong is the only way you feel you've learned something. You have to go into conversation wanting to be wrong. And that's the difference. It's not faking curiosity just to lull them into a false sense of security. It is this idea that I wonder, what can I learn today? And here are a few steps. How do you do this? How do you start to embrace being wrong? The first one, the tough part, is separate your present from your past identity. That is, what I mean by that is that you want to believe that you were dumber last year than you were this year. That is, make your identity the fact that if I believe the same thing this year that I believed last year, then I've learned nothing. So you actually see yourself as a failure for believing the same thing this year that you believed last year. If you take that on as an identity, suddenly it becomes much easier, much more palatable psychologically for us to embrace being wrong. The second way of feeling comfortable being wrong is to separate your opinions from your identity. There's nothing wrong with having core values, right? There's nothing wrong with seeing yourself as a lifelong learner, seeing yourself as caring for vulnerable people, wanting freedom and justice. These are all core values. But that is different from opinions. There is a God. God is great. God is dead. All of those kinds of beliefs are opinions. And if you are able to focus more on your core values, it turns out, much to your surprise, you'll find in conversations, that you actually share a lot more with people who have very, very different views than you do. Because it turns out there's research that shows that people actually share a lot of common ground. It's not that, contrary to what you'll read on Facebook, it is not that people who are hardcore Trump supporters don't care about people. It's just that their definition of protecting vulnerable people is different than yours. You will never get to that part of the conversation if you start off assuming that they are an idiot. So, the third approach is where you approach every conversation with what I call, this is just a lame term I came up with, the view detective. That is, you approach the conversation with the goal of saying, where did your views come from? Tell me about your background. Tell me how you grew up. Tell me, what. It's not about why you got these wacky beliefs. Because how did they develop? I mean, you're a great example, right? You were a believer. So the idea is being curious about why was I a believer? And if you can have those conversations with yourself, you certainly can have those conversations with other people, where what you're trying to do is find out what led to the beliefs that they had. Being open to other ideas does not mean, to be clear, accepting of other ideas. Right? That's a completely different thing. It turns out that, in fact, some of the most productive relationships are where there was a lot of conflict. If you are a Beatles fan, you know that John Lennon and Paul McCartney had very, very different musical styles, but they were an incredibly powerful partnership. They wrote songs together having very different ideas in terms of what makes a great song. Tina Fey and Amy Poehler have very, very different views of comedy, but they are an incredibly productive comedy duo. So how does that happen? How do you have people with different views that are able to have these very, very productive conversations? It turns out that there are two types of conflict. When we think about the word conflict, we generally think of what we call relationship conflict. That is where your conflict is with the other person. You think they are an idiot. You think they don't know. You have then a responsibility to tell them, here's what you're missing. Task conflict is where the conflict is about the ideas. It is not personal at all. You disagree, and in fact, they've actually done studies where they show people like going at each other, but then as soon as that disagreement is done, they're like slapping each other, they're going out for beer. I used to, Jim Little would know, we had in our department a professor called John Pierce. Incredible guy, very, very smart guy. When I was a brand new faculty there, he terrified me. We would go into these department meetings and he would just, I would say something and he would like very, very vigorously argue against it. I said, oh my God, here's a senior faculty, he thinks I'm a complete idiot. And as we're walking out of the meeting, so I feel like, terrible. As we walk out, he said, that was a really interesting point you made. We should go grab a beer and talk about that some more. I said, wait, I thought you didn't like what I said at all. I think, and it took me a while to get comfortable with that. The idea that you can have disagreements on ideas without thinking that it's about the person. In fact, I'm going to go one step further. This is something that's important to me, right? I'll tell you why. Because I honestly believe that the moment you think the other person is an idiot, it is an intellectually lazy way of getting away with it. It actually is very, very, it frees you. If you think the other people are awful, hateful, terrible human beings, then that's great, right? You can dismiss them without having to bother to put in the cognitive and intellectual effort to try and have a conversation with them. I have a cousin who, I know she's not online because she's in India right now, but I remember on her Facebook thing, she's stay hardcore liberal progressive, and on Facebook she would post things like, if you are a Trump supporter, if you believe these things, then unfriend me right now. And I'm saying that, shaking my head and saying, oh my gosh. To me, that's just the opposite of, dealing with task conflict. It is focusing. If you believe that task conflict requires an essential component of task conflict is that you believe that the other person is really smart, that they have reasons for their views. If you don't believe that, then you're freed from putting in any thought, anything. It's not even worth talking to them, right? Why should you? Because you're the smart one, they're an idiot. And so it's not a conversation worth having. And nothing wrong with that. If you don't want to have those conversations, I'm not saying you need to have those conversations, but just recognize that you're doing it primarily to save yourself the trouble of having that conversation. It's just much less effortful intellectually to do that. So that's the idea of trying to have task conflict. So how do you do that? Well, first thing is it's focus on the how rather than the why. It's not why do you believe in something, but one way of progressing the conversation is by asking them how they came to those beliefs. How would these things work in the real world? If frame it as an exploration, you want, oh, really? You think that we should have prayers in schools? Yeah. How would that work? Would you be comfortable if the teacher was a Muslim, if they led the class in a Muslim prayer, or would you only say, I'm curious, how would that work? By asking them how things would work, the great outcome of that is very often people will come to realize the flaws in their beliefs without you having to tell them. The moment you tell them their beliefs are flawed, identity threat, DEFCON 1, the amygdala is engaged. They're not listening to you after that. But it's sneaky to try and ask people to explain. Remember, I told you about that certainty experiment. Here's what Dan Ariely, who's another behavioral scientist, he actually does this experiment where he asks people, do you know how a toilet flush works? And everybody says, yeah, toilet flush. Yeah, I know how a toilet flush works. He actually gives them all the parts of a toilet. And said, okay, when you assemble it, put this toilet together. And most people fail at that task. But the outcome of that is that they start to question their beliefs. They start to realize that confidence in their beliefs go down. And it has been shown this carries over to other domains too. Right after they realize that they don't know how a toilet flush works, you ask them about their confidence in some of their other beliefs, and that goes down too. So one technique in conversations is to focus on the how rather than how would that work rather than why do you have such idiotic beliefs. The second one is to stick to a few strong arguments. An interesting fact is research has shown that you'd think that if you have two strong arguments, it would be more effective to present those two strong arguments and then add some other arguments, supporting arguments. It turns out that when people process your arguments, they average it. They average the strength of your arguments rather than add it. It's not an additive model, it's an averaging model. That is, people who are presented two strong arguments are more convinced than people who are presented those same two strong arguments, but a bunch of additional supporting arguments. So when you're having a conversation, don't try and badger people with all the facts that you have. Stick to a few facts and then go into exploration. The other advantage of understanding this, is that it makes you speak less and listen more. You're not trying to, shower them with facts. Give them a couple of facts and then shut the hell up. Let them talk. So how do you do this? What are some ideas, some quick tips? Here's how. These are some of the conversation exploration phrases that you can use. Things like, help me understand. What led you to that? That's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? The moment you see things, I use a lot of softening phrases. When I'm having conversations with people, I anticipate some of the things they're going to say and then preempt that by softening it up front. I remember my daughter was asked me to go negotiate for a car. I have a lot of people who ask me to go to car dealerships to negotiate. And I will start off. I will sit down before they even say anything. I will sit down and say something like, hey, by the way, I just want you to know before we get started, I'm a business professor, right? I understand you have to make a profit, right? If you are not making a profit, then you're going to be unhappy and we're not going to be able to make a deal. So I know you have to make a profit. All we're trying to do here is I'm trying to see if we can come to a deal where you get what you want in terms of profit and I get what I want, which is a better deal than I can get anywhere else. That puts them on notice.
I used to do sales training.
Yeah.
For business sales and selling.
Oh, really?
Or open-ended questioning.
Yep. Exactly. And we'll talk about this. There's actually a process and technique for that. What are things that I hope you don't recognize is things like this. That's irrational. That's obviously not true. That makes no sense scientifically. You've been brainwashed. You're clearly in your information echo chamber. Congratulations. That approach, those are all things that if the goal is to put people in their place, fantastic. This should be on your phone to refer. If the goal is to have a conversation, I promise, these phrases immediately shut the conversation down. And cause resentment. And as I said earlier, in terms of embracing the joy of being wrong, this requires something called intellectual humility. Right? And intellectual humility works because we close our minds when we feel defensive, and it's not just the other person, right? You do the same thing. You shut down. When somebody threatens you, when you hear him talk about how he's an ardent NRA supporter, you actually kind of viscerally feel it. If you feel very differently, you look at him differently, you feel like you have to, I'm not saying you don't want to have a conversation with him. You probably want to go up and have a conversation with him, but you approach him with the goal of saying, there's something wrong with you. That's the problem. It happens instinctively, right? So we're motivated to see ourselves as being right. So here it is. The way I want you to think about this going forward is that the people who have the highest intellectual humility are the ones who are the most secure. They don't feel the need to be right in a conversation. So see it, this idea of being wrong as a strength, as something, oh my God, I love being wrong. And I will be very candid with you. When I had that conversation with Tom at the Harvest Festival, when he asked me why I don't come for the Freethinkers meetings anymore, what I told him, and to his credit, he said, oh, you need to come and talk to the group, rather than saying, okay, thanks, nice meeting you, move on to the next stall. Is that I felt, I genuinely don't enjoy being around people who are telling me that I'm right, who have the same beliefs that I do. I get bored very easily. That is part of my identity, right? I want to be around people who are telling me that I'm wrong. That makes me think. I'm saying, oh my God, that is, to me, intellectually invigorating. If I had come to Lake Superior Freethinkers meetings, and every week or every month, the speaker was somebody who is a NRA member, is somebody who is a preacher, who really firmly believes in that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, frankly, I would find that super interesting. But to hang out with people who are trying to compete in their freethinkerness is just not that interesting to me. I'm sorry to say. Yeah. Yep. Mhm. I think that happens all the time. That is somebody who is not in scientist mode. So when I say scientific mode of thinking, it is not a person or a role. It's not. In fact, there are many, many research scientists who have the title of scientist who do not embrace the scientific mode of thinking. And you can see why, right? The reasoning is exactly the same. It's an identity theft. If I have spent the last 10 years of my life studying something to try and show if I have a hypothesis and I want to prove that hypothesis, well, then you can see how it would be an identity threat to believe that they're wrong. And to me, that is not scientific thinking at all. When I talk about scientific thinking, I'm not talking about being a scientist. I'm talking about thinking like a scientist, which many scientists don't do because they have their identity tied up in it. It means being very, very open to being wrong. But my guess is the researcher has been trained to keep on and on and on and on studying it in order to finally show that they're right. And that is not scientific mode of thinking. There's actually a very interesting, here, I'll get to it. I know we're running out of time and I want to also make sure you have time for questions and things like that. So if we practice, God answers prayers. Okay, that's an assertion from a believer. If you take on the preacher mode, okay, how would you respond to that? You would say something like, well, that's simply not true. There's no mechanism for everyone's prayers to be answered by some entity in the sky. Let me tell you what the research says about people, about why people believe. Or, this is the problem. This is why I'm worried about religious people. Because these imaginary beliefs are dangerous. They infect society. I mean, that's like the preacher mode, right? Or have you read The God Delusion? You know what? I've got a copy. I'll lend it to you. That is the sermonizing. Hey, you'll find a copy of the Bible in your dresser in your hotel room. That's the sermonizing approach. The prosecutor approach, God answers prayers, would be responding with something, oh, which God? I bet your chosen, your birth God, right? Or the God who answers touchdown prayers, but ignores those of parents whose children died of cancer. Is that the God you're talking about, whose prayers they're answering? That is the prosecutor approach. Let me show you why your thinking is so horribly flawed. Okay? Or anybody have an alternative? What would be a good prosecutor? Let me show you why you're an idiot. Answer to this question. Yeah. Yeah, say a prayer. Why don't you, in fact, I'll tell you what, say a prayer right now that I get struck down by lightning. Go ahead. I'm waiting. That would be prosecutor. Politician mode would be something like, I guess that's, possible. I'm sure prayer helps you personally. Or, I know that spirituality is important. Just trying not to rock the boat too much unless you're around people who believe the same thing. So you can come up with your own. The scientist mode, on the other hand, would approach something like this with, tell me more. How does prayer help you? Or have you ever had a prayer that didn't work? These are great questions, right? Why do you think that didn't work? You approach it, and the tough part about this is it cannot be faked. You cannot approach a conversation with fake curiosity where your goal is to, again, try to get them to a point where you can pounce. Yes, the tone is really important. It's very, very hard to get that tone. And that's why I say it has to be genuine, right? You have to think, you have to approach the conversation with the goal of saying, I want to learn more about your beliefs. I talk, as I told you about my atheism in my classroom, and I had a student come to me and say, you know what? I used to be like you. I'm a born again Christian. I'm completely. I said, oh my God, that's so interesting. When we set up a time, we come to, and he would come to my office and we'd have these really interesting conversations. And he would tell me about why he believes all these, and I was, God, that's interesting. And then I said, I would always ask, by the way, I rarely make statements. I'm saying, do you want to know why I don't believe or why I'm having trouble believing? And they say, yeah, actually, yes, I want to know. And then I tell them, this is all pretty subtle, right? If in the middle of a conversation, if I had stopped and said, let me tell you why I don't believe, immediately it sets up an identity threat. And that's why the tone is so important. I would always ask questions. Do you want to know why I'm having trouble with this? Because the moment they say, yes, tell me, I've got it. Then I can share my views comfortably and they don't feel threatened. They feel that this is a safe space. A lot of practice. It really is. I mean, honestly, it's a lot of practice. I can, if you have done this in the past, the honest truth is it'll take a lot of effort. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, I've got a handout here, which summarizes a lot of the things, includes some of these phrases and things like that. And I also want to go back to, what was Bruce? No.
Rod.
David's comment about in sales, how they have this process, this technique, and it's called motivational interviewing. In fact, I'm going to try and jump to that right now. So here is a process for starting to have those conversations. This is a fairly well-known technique called motivational interviewing, which involves three main components. The first is trying to ask as many open-ended questions as possible, where what you're trying to do in the conversation, in fact, your goal is to speak as little as possible and extract as much information from them as possible. So what is it about, if they make a statement or if you know where they stand on something, what is it about that belief that you want to know more about? It is not what is it about that belief that is wrong. That's how you kind of train yourself to be curious. Tell me your story. That's a safe starting point. That's a very generic question that works in most situations. Tell me your story. How did you come to become a born-again Christian? You're not asking about their beliefs at all. You're not even probing about, say, tell me your story. Okay. I would follow up with, what do you mean by that? I'm just curious about. Yeah, again, you're focusing on the beliefs. I'm focusing on, then tell me your story. It's not tell me the story about your beliefs. It is tell me about yourself. How did you grow up?
People love to talk about themselves.
People love to talk about themselves. In fact, by the way, I tell my students, this is a party trick. If you're one of those people that it thinks of yourself as shy, that networking, I'm not good at it. I'm not comfortable going in a room and just talking to people. Actually, here's a secret, and this is absolutely true. The secret to being the best conversationalist is to say nothing and ask a lot of questions. Easiest way to start a conversation with a stranger is to just ask them something about them. People don't realize how much they're talking when they're talking about themselves. I've actually seen this. You could have a conversation between two people where it's one person talking about themselves all through the whole thing. After that conversation is done, you ask them, what did you think of the other person as a conversationalist? They will say, they were really a great conversation. They were really interesting, even though they said very, very little, right? So that's what I would. Second is reflective listening. So when they say something, try and put it back to them, reframe it as a statement. So it seems like, and that reflective listening shouldn't be, again, an identity threat. It should be something, reflect back to them some of those core beliefs. So it seems like the reason you believe that abortion should be illegal, it seems like because you care about protecting vulnerable individuals. And their eyes will light up and say, yes, don't you care about individuals who cannot protect themselves? That's what, and you will discover very often in these conversations that that's what is driving their beliefs. It's not that they hate women and maybe some, but not most. Okay, it is that they think, because remember, everybody has to feel that they are doing the right thing. People want to believe that they are good moral individuals, and we rethink reality in order to make those beliefs true, that we're good individuals. But we are incredibly fabulous rationalizers. We are able to rationalize almost any behavior. As long as we can make ourselves feel good about it, we will do it. The same people who will happily take a box of pens from the work, the supplies closet, and take it home and give it to their kids, are those same people who will not take $1 from the coffee jar that is there where coffee contributions are. Why is it? Why is it that you're willing to take pens, do your personal copying at work, but are not willing to take $1 and put it in your pocket? It turns out it's much, much easier for us to rationalize. The impact on the company is exactly the same. It's much easier for us to rationalize taking these pens home and giving it to our kids than it is to take $1. Now you feel like a thief. So, and the other part of the motivational interviewing is affirm beliefs. As I said, just say, wow, that's really interesting. I can see how that would be very helpful for you personally. And there's a technique, maybe not relevant in this conversation, this particular conversation, but reinforce autonomy. Very powerful technique where in business, in sales, the secret, if you want to, you present options and you say, here is our proposal, but it really is up to you whether you want to accept it or not. It turns out there have been lots of studies just telling people it's up to you whether you agree with that or not. It's up to you whether you want to accept my proposal or not. Dramatically increases the likelihood that they will accept your proposals because they feel that they have control. Okay? So we don't have time for this, but what I was going to do is just give some statements, have you pair up and say, how can you do this in scientist mode? But I will just end my talk and then we can have a conversation if there's time by saying, here are 5 questions to know whether you are having a good conversation or not. First, am I genuinely curious? And does my tone reflect that? Or am I faking my curiosity just to make my point? Second, did I ask at least 5 sincere questions that tries and get their story? Third is intellectual humility. Did I explicitly express humility? Did at some time in the conversation, did I say like, hey, I don't know, but this is what I think. Am I wrong here? It turns out by asking simple questions like that, where am I thinking screwed up? I remember talking in class, again, talking about atheism at a public university. I don't know, fortunately, I'm on a phased retirement, so it can't affect me too much now. But you know, when I go in there and say, I will say something like, listen, I'm an atheist, I've always been an atheist, but you know what? I'm probably wrong. The fact that most of you are not atheists means that you must be getting something from your religious beliefs that I'm missing completely. I would love to know what is it that I'm missing, because I don't get it. Now that invites someone to a conversation as opposed to pushing them away. And that's why that student came up to me and said, let me tell you, you want to know what you're missing? Let me tell you. And it was the start of great conversations. And then, of course, did I avoid those correcting language, those phrases? And did I acknowledge the other person's feelings or experiences of being listening? If you can remember these 5 things, and if not, by the way, I've got this summarized on a handout that you're willing. If I don't have enough copies, you can email me and I'll send it to you. But at the end of the day, the goal isn't better victories. It's better conversations. Thank you.
It's true, but I don't think that in every case it necessarily has to be true what they're saying. On the flip side, in the scientist mode, I wonder, is it fair to say that they are required to say, I don't know, in order to be a good scientist?
Yes, I think being a good scientist requires some openness and the willingness to pivot. I think I had a point on a slide that I just skipped through without talking. There was a study that was done. This is very interesting. It's tangentially related, but it'll answer your question. There was a study that was done in Italy where they brought in a bunch of entrepreneurs to give them training on strategy, on business strategy, right? Defining business strategy. So they brought in these people, went through this business strategy training. Unknown to them, there were 2 groups. And randomly, half the people were put into a control group. The other half were put into a scientific thinking group. The only difference between the 2 groups, they were both given the same content. The only difference was that one group was taught about strategy, business strategy. Here's how you define a business strategy, and here's how business strategy influences your business decision making. The other group was told one small thing differently. They were told, think of strategy as theory, right? What that means is, they said, when you do your customer interviews, when you gather data as you're building your business, treat that as data to create hypotheses. When your customer interviews should be data to create hypotheses. And then when you create your prototypes, when you create your minimally viable product, those are like tests of your hypothesis, right? That was the only difference. The only difference was they were all taught about strategy was one group was told, think of strategy as just a theory that you keep testing based on information you gather. And they tracked this group over the next couple of years. At the end of the first year, they found that the control group, the average revenue from all those entrepreneurs in that group was about $260. The average revenue from the group that was in the scientific thinking or strategy as theory group was $12,000. And then they tracked them and said, what led to this big difference? And it turned out that those people who were told that strategy is just a theory, that you have to keep testing, and they pivoted their strategy more than twice as often. They kept, as they gathered more information, they test things out and say, oh my God, that's not a good strategy. They change strategy, even though very often in business school, you're taught that strategy is what drives all of your business. The whole idea, you come up with a strategy and all your decisions should be driven by that strategy. Well, this group kept pivoting their strategy and were a lot more successful. I think that gets to the scientific mode of thinking, is being willing to change based on data, even change your impressions of people based on information you get. And that can evolve even during a single conversation.
It's like experimentation.
Yeah, that's all it is. The idea is to enjoy learning things, right? So one of the greatest compliment my daughter ever gave me. So my daughter and I we are constantly arguing, and that's one of those safe spaces, right? Where she knows that the arguments are more for intellectual entertainment rather than any. So it doesn't matter what she says. I often take the opposing view. So she will sit with me and she'll be ranting about Trump and just this thing, this thing. And I will say, hold on a second. Or all of these people, let's talk about, oh, you want to talk about Palestine? You want to talk about Israel? Let's talk about what he has achieved that other people have. Oh, you want to talk about immigration? Finally, we have somebody who has the guts to actually do something about this immigration. Let me tell you what bills he has proposed that actually, I will have these discussions and at one point, the compliment she gave me was we got to the end of this thing and she says, Dad, sometimes I don't know what you really believe. And I said, oh my God, I succeeded. That is just great. To me, that is like the success. Yeah. Yeah. But that's exactly what you would do. If the problem is very often we slip into these modes saying, I need, you're doing it with the best of intentions, right? Let me educate you. And you are very surprised when they don't turn around and thank you for it. I watched all these videos. I typed up the summary. I'm trying to make life easier for you, and you're not grateful to me?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. If you go in with the goal of trying to educate them, that conversation, I'm telling you, it's not going to go well right at the beginning. Or it might go well from your perspective. It's not going to be what I call an effective conversation. Clarify a little bit more. The business of doing business in general, I mean, is business. I think anything we do is business, right? I mean, anytime you interact or exchange anything with anybody, forget about corporations and things. If you are in a completely agrarian society and you're exchanging your corn for a cut of beef, that's business. Is that what you mean by business? Just exchange in general?
No.
Okay. So I think the only reason I'm having trouble with that is because when for example, marketing, right? People often have a misconception about what marketing is. They think that marketing is advertising. I've even had a business professor in the business school come to me. He came to my office one day and he flung a flyer on my desk. And he says, somebody has gone around in our school parking lot and stuck these flyers on everybody's windshield. This is what you marketing people do. No. I said, by definition, if you are annoyed by it, by definition, that's bad marketing. That is not what we teach. If you're annoyed by it, obviously we're doing something wrong. That's not good marketing by any means. So I think we see business, and again, I'm speaking specifically on the marketing side of business because that's my expertise, is that we see marketing as a way of satisfying people's needs while meeting my objectives. Whatever that. Yeah, and I think you're right, right? It's when we talk about, for example, how AI is affecting how people, we are very, very concerned about what we call dark patterns, which is using psychology to try and influence you to do things that are not in your best interest. To design systems to make it easy for you to go right by the disclaimers page or the things, your privacy, give up your privacy. Do companies do that? Absolutely. That's part of what we research. But would I say that that's the goal of business? That's what we're trying to do in business? Definitely not. The ideal, and all of us try to live up to an ideal. Do we get there? I don't know. But the ideal is that we make money by meeting some real needs of consumers. If not, can you give me examples of where needs are being created where it is not in consumers' welfare, that is not for the benefit of consumers? The answer is absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And we that's part of what we study also. Thank you very much. If you didn't get a hand on one, you can just email me and I will send you a PDF.
You wouldn't get it, I'm sure. I'm assuming this is just part one. This talk is just part one. Oh, I'd love to hear him.
Really nice slide.
You could go on and on.
Yeah.
AI of some of those.
Yeah, that AI generated image of the pastor,
Yeah.
well, it's a coincidence that he looks like Richard Dawkins.
Brunch at Pizza Luce, everyone. Everyone's welcome. Thanks for coming today.
You can turn off.
I will take care of the recording.
Just hear the, not hearing anything. Turn up the volume.
Oh, really? See, because, yeah,
Nothing, they don't.
yeah, no, I'm very